That's some great timing right there, that it comes out on the first day of BroadwayCon, and so make sure you check it out, download it, stream it, listen to it on SiriusXM, do all the things. Exactly. My thoughts exactly. All right, well, this was quite the roller coaster. And I guess, like Rogers and Hammerstein taught us, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. You've been with it for, was it 5, 7, 6? Okay, somewhere in there. 6 years you journeyed with this musical. Were you familiar with the music of the Aweigh brothers before this opportunity?
Yes. I was introduced to the Aweigh brothers by my castmate, John Gallagher Jr., when we were doing American Idiot in 2010. He was playing a record in his basement dressing room, and I went down to visit him between shows, and I was like, "What's this?" And he was like, "Do you know these guys?" And then that was my introduction. I became a fan after that, like many of us in that cast. But my association with Swept Away is not as long as other people on this panel. So we might want to ask, which one of you go first, Brian?
I first talked about this in the summer of 2015, which was almost 10 years ago.
Jeez.
So,
yeah,
that's a long time.
Yeah, and did you know the brothers?
No, I didn't actually. No, I didn't. Matthew Masson, the producer, knew Chris Miller, who's my collaborator on the show. We co-arranged and orchestrated the show. And Matthew spoke to him about the potential of doing a musical, and my memory is that Chris was like, "I don't think that I want to do it. Do you want to do it? I'm going to give him your name." And we were at like a 4th of July barbecue. Chris and I have known each other for a long time. And by the end of the night, we were like, "We should do it together. That'd be really fun, right?" And we never worked together like that. I've worked on his songs as a composer, but we'd never collaborated as arrangers together. And so that's kind of where that began. It was many years before anything even happened, but that was the conversation we had.
And I had the delightful chance to visit with the Aweigh brothers in the studio, which of course, for anyone who doesn't know, is 2 brothers and an honorary brother, and heard about, and I want to invite you to maybe elaborate, anyone that knows this story from them firsthand as well, that this began as a book that they were fascinated with as kids. Does anybody know the story?
Yeah, their dad gave them the book The Custom of the Sea, and they just were very struck by the survival story of it and the resilience and all of that. And that's what sort of gave me the idea to write Mignonette, which is loosely based on the story that book is about. That book is about the fallout of that incident that happened. It's really incredible, and it sparked a big legal case. If you go to law school, you study the thing that's about.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dudley versus Great Britain or something like that, I don't know the name of it. But it basically was a case that established that necessity was not a reason to murder. You know what I mean? You couldn't murder somebody because you had to.
Yeah. Well, it's that, and I love books, and I love the notion that a story like that was, on the pages of paper in a book from so many years ago in their lives could inspire an album that would then inspire a stage musical. So it's really cool to think about art begetting art in that manner. Yeah. Rachel, I want to bring you into this. I was so gobsmacked at your design and what you pulled off. For those of you that saw it, give it up for Rachel. When that transition happens, when that set transformed, was that just not chill-inducing? I mean, and then, so talk with us a little bit about what your vision was for the piece, how you came up with that incredible idea to, do that amazing transformation. And my favorite, if I can just tack on one more, the mirror from above. That just took my breath away. So delight us with how you envisioned and executed that incredible design.
Sure. Oh my God, I'm honored. I mean, we, honestly, the design that you saw on Broadway was, I think, in the studio, the second thing I showed Michael and Kevin, and it never changed. It never changed. It got bigger. You would attest. but it didn't, the idea never changed. And the need of the story is so specific that it's so, it's so joyful until it isn't, this story. And to be able to see those men at sea on that boat working, the physicality of it, the muscle of it, the pure athleticism of it, to give them that opportunity. David Newman is my great collaborator and partner, and to make something knowing how he would use it. Even still, he broke that first boat like 6 times, and I kept having that still to hold up to the choreography. But the puzzle of it is the same, actually. It's that it was designed for Berkeley Rep, which is a 3/4 thrust space, the space that we were using, and we needed the heart of the action to be in exactly the same place in both parts of the story. And the distinction between what happens before and after that shipwreck, and the need to be abandoned at sea and so haunted by such a horrible thing as the trauma of going through that shipwreck, and the question of how we could give that experience to the audience, and then literally how could we stage the second half of the show, which is 4 guys in a teeny tiny boat, and how could we give the audience the feeling of how much trouble those guys were in. Like, they're in huge trouble. 4 guys, tiny boat, giant ocean, tiny theater, right? So how do you put one of the great gifts of being in such a wonderful, intimate theater as that theater, the Peaks Theater or Berkeley Rep, is everybody is close, and everybody was kind of on the boat with the guys. You could feel it from the audience. And so, I get a lot of credit for that shipwreck. I'm very, very proud of it, but it is all of us together. What's happening with those lights is unbelievable. Of course, that choreography sequence, when those guys are getting tossed and realizing this is it, and you can see it in their bodies, and it's like they're suspended. And that's David, that's Kevin's lights, that's John Shiver's sound, what's happening, you're in trouble. We worked that sequence again and again and again because we were like, I'm not scared yet. There's a lot of that. But once it goes up, and that mirror under the boat, which is such a great idea, is Kevin Adams' idea. And he knew it's an old magician's trick, mirror, how you use mirror, how you can erase solid objects with a reflection. And I had shown them that model, and it was the wood underside of the ship, and he was like, you should make that mirror. So we did. We put a dark tinted mirror, and then suddenly it really did feel like you were haunted by the ghost of that ship because it was hovering right there. Thank you. But it was something you could also forget. And then the ocean itself was multiplied because the structure of the beams mirrored the structure of the water, and it was all reflected. And in Berkeley Rep, you could choose to watch the action either in the mirror or in the boat, so you could really see what was happening. So it was quite a night.
There's a name for this that I learned this past month. I'm not someone who reads reviews when I'm in a show, because I don't find it useful, because I still have to go and do the show that night, and I want to try to replicate something that one reviewer liked, or change something that somebody didn't like. But when a show is over, I'm more open to it, and I read all the reviews after we finished the show. And what happened in that shipwreck is, with all those elements coming together, every single review praised it. It's called a coup de theatre. And it is when every element, every department shines. But I have to say, it all hangs on that set change.
I want to say too, I don't know if you remember this, but in the script, at that point, all it said was, the ship sinks. And so, we had done probably 2 or 3 readings and a workshop, and we get to that point, there's music on Vignette that is sort of the shipwreck music, and so we kind of like approximated that music, and then when we got to Berkeley and we saw Rachel's amazing design, we were like, so what happens? And she demonstrated everything, and it was like incredible. We were blown away. And Chris and I are like, great. Well, what happens? And so we went away and kind of had to write a story of what it is, and we sort of came up with the idea where everything sort of is rolling around and building and building and building, and then it freezes like you're in, time stops. And I was in a car accident when I was in my early 20s, and I was fine. It was wild, but all I remember saying is like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God the whole time. And so we're like, they should pray. These guys that we just saw basically like say, that's not for us in Ain't No Man. They should sing the prayer that Big Brother sings in slow motion, and then all hell breaks loose, and the thing happens. But we had to sort of figure that out and come up with that story.
Yeah, that's true. I went back and looked at that first stage direction from from John Logan, and it was absolutely like, it's a simple set. It's a platform. It's a wooden platform and a wooden stage. And we're like, okay, I'm gonna put it over here. But it is true. It's like, this is similar to Hadestown, actually, where there is nothing written of the transition. It's just like, and then you're in Hadestown. You're like, okay. but because these collaborations, both that show and this show, are so deep, it's interwoven. So it's like this, now you build, and now they build. And it is a fully seamless collaboration. It's one of the things I'm most proud of, those costumes, the extraordinary work of Hilferty. It's just an incredibly interwoven, and that's all credit to Michael Mayer, of course.
Oh, so good. I was full of goosebumps when you were describing some of that. And can we also just give it up for Hadestown, that I also revisited recently to catch. That's funny, actually, now I'm realizing I caught the penultimate performance of Swept Away, and I caught the penultimate performance of Jordan Fisher recently in Hadestown, and every time your set opens up in that, incredible moment in Hadestown, the first couple of times I saw it, it made me cry, because I was like, I can't believe that art like this exists, and I'm alive to see it. So it's such a testament to you and your craft, and I'm so glad that you're naming your collaborators. Each of you continue to do that, because of course we can't have everyone here with us today. So continue to include them and name them. I love that.
The one other collaborator I will name is, of course, the bajillion people it took to engineer and build that idea. She's like, you're in the studio, like, and then it'll just do this, and then the ropes will do this, and this is gonna spin. I know it looks crazy, but it's gonna spin on this little thing. And the guys who engineered that, the people who engineered that, the artists who painted it and executed it, I can't say enough. None of this happens without them. So, all credit to them.
Yeah, oh, I love that. And another one of my deep curiosities was what actually was going on in the boat for you? Like, as Rachel rightly said, 4 guys, teeny little boat. It did the magic that we needed it to do, but just on a practical level, aren't you kind of curious, how did you figure out how to sit? What did it really look like down in there? What was that? There's a whole different kind of choreo to that, I'm sure.
When we first started rehearsing this, it was in a rehearsal room in Berkeley, California, at Berkeley Rep. And it was a rehearsal that didn't have the gyro, it didn't spin, it didn't do anything. It was a rehearsal. It wasn't a rehearsal, it was the actual boat, but we didn't know what it was going to do. So we just blocked it very simply and found our way emotionally through the piece. We barely touched it in that space, because we all knew pretty quickly, we're very close to this. We don't want to overdo it, we don't want to blow it, it's really heavy. And so we just did it as little as possible until we got into tech. And that's when we started learning about how sightlines are going to play a part, and how fast or slow the boat should spin, or should it be still. And we tried a lot of different things. And in Berkeley, more than any other place we did it, it spun most of the time. Because it was this thrust and people were sitting on 3 sides, there was always somebody who was going, if it stopped moving, who was going to have a crummy view. So it didn't really stop. It rotated most of the time. We couldn't do that at a main stage. We couldn't do that on Broadway. We had to find a different way of doing it. What I can say is that I know every rib of that boat. I know every bump and scratch. I made a lot of them. I know this is going to sound weird, but I'm very intimately familiar with Adrian Blake Ensko's body. Because we have to spoon in this boat, and we have to be physically close, and it had to happen like right away. And I'm glad that I love him so much, and he loves me so much, and we get along, because there was a moment in tech, in Berkeley, maybe it was DC, but I just remember sitting there. In tech, you have to wait to sit and hold for long periods of time, because they're changing a light, or they're adjusting sound, or they're doing something, they're having a conversation. And it's not easy to get in and out of this boat, so we'd just stay where we were. And we'd be like on top of each other, right? And I realized that any other line of work, this would be really weird. To be spooning this person who's not my wife. But it's not weird, because it's Broadway, it's theater. The lines are different. It's a different level of intimacy and connection and friendship.
It's funny, we bought that boat, we went hunting for it, and we had an idea about it, and the guys at PRG found that boat. They're like, we can't build something like this, and they kept shopping, and they kept sending me pictures of boats, and I was like, that's not gonna be an investment. And we bought this boat from a guy who was selling it on behalf of his friend. He was 80 if he was a day. They were in upstate New York, and the guy from the shop went to see it, and he sent me pictures, and he was like, I think this is the boat. And he sent me a picture, and pictures of him in the boat in this guy's backyard. And I was like, buy it right now. But I knew you guys, it was a scene partner. It was like a fifth character in that scene. And so we always made it possible until we got here, when it wasn't possible to do all the rehearsal only in that boat, because it was going to inform everything we did.
Yeah. And was the motion something that you also had to get used to? Because that might have been a little disconcerting to have to be with that.
There's a song called "Satan Pulls the Strings" that the maid sings towards the end of the story. And in Berkeley, it was different than it was every other place we did it. In Berkeley, he sings that song at the end of the monologue, this long monologue where he's telling us who he is and who he's been in his life and all the awful things he's done. He would end it and say, "Don't ask who I am, you know." And start singing the song. So I am on top of Adrian, protecting him, looking up at Johnny, and then the whole song, we are frozen, and he's moving and singing. And we had to stay, and the boat spins the whole time at the top speed. And it sucked. Because in tech, like I said, you do things over and over and over again. And that boat, when we were doing it in Berkeley, for whatever reason, at the end of running that song, and we would hold, they had to reset the boat, and it had to unwind all the spins that it had done during the song. And after 2 or 3 times, he'd finish the song, and I'd say, "Step out of the boat!" Because I could not sit in the boat and get spun around the other way again. I am motion sickness. I have motion sickness now on any, the teacups rides and those things. And I don't know if it's because I'm just getting older or if it's because of that experience in Berkeley.
Wow. That's incredible. And just the artfulness, I'm sure. I would notice when one of you would be speaking and another character would be supposedly sleeping or whatever, and just the arrangement, just the artfulness and specificity of the arrangement of one arm would be over the side of the boat, or someone would be resting their head, just this putting that together. Is that also just a lot of specific collab between you guys and Michael?
Some of it is, and some of it is just finding a position that you can hold when you're sleeping on stage. Especially in the end version of Satan Pulls the Strings, we are sleeping for that. And there were times where if my neck is at the wrong angle, I have to pick a moment where I know nobody's looking at me so I can adjust my body, because it just, it's not a soft boat. Except if you're Wayne, who has pillows underneath him.
Oh, this is the tea we want. wanted. Like, I was like, what's in the boat? Like, was there?
So there's like flotsam in the boat. There's like, what is supposed to be pieces of fabric from the shipwreck that we have collected, and you don't see this, but it's like there's stuff that you could justify would be in the boat, and then underneath that is like cushions for Wayne and for Adrian. But for me and Johnny, we didn't have. No, we were laying on hard benches.
Some of that lyricism, though, is a really beautiful collaboration between Michael and David Newman.
I was going to say that. David Newman was a big part of our bodies and the way we moved, obviously, in the whole show. But in that little boat, you don't think there is choreo, but there was very specific movements and motions and things that we did because of him.
Yeah. Brian, speaking of bringing this musical landscape into the theater, we're having more and more. Jamestown Revival for the Outsiders comes to mind. The Aweigh Brothers, even Green Day or Alanis Morissette. Sting. We're having more and more all the time. I think of next season's Lost Boys. More and more of these canons that are from outside the theater, but they can't just slap it up there. It's got to become theatrical. You spoke a few minutes ago about some of the decision-making that has to go into, well, there's shipwreck music on the album, blah, blah, blah. So take us through your vision of translating the music of the Aweigh Brothers, giving it the theatrical context and landscape that it needed, and what you think maybe about the greater picture of all of like the ones that I just named that are now becoming part of the Broadway canon.
Yeah. For me, the most important thing is the story. It has to be the story. And to go another step, the words that they say are also the most important thing. And so I've done a couple shows like this, and where you're sort of taking existing music and trying to figure it out. And the approach that I like to take is to kind of break it down to just the lyric, and maybe the chord changes, like just like take it down to like the studs, the bones, essentially, and start to ask like, okay, who's the character singing? What is the story in this moment? What is the larger story of the whole thing? And start to kind of make decisions about what does Big Brother sound like, and what does Little Brother sound like, and how are they different from each other? And kind of taking away what we know about the music for a minute, and just trying to make decisions as if we were writing the score, from scratch. And that's really fun. It's a really fun process because you have a lot of ideas. Some of them are bad or wrong or good. It doesn't matter. You just have to kind of throw things at the wall and just play with it and figure out what kind of works. And as we were putting this together, we knew that the captain had to kind of have his own thing. And when he sang, and he really only has one big song, that kind of had to have his own thing. And we knew that the mate had this huge character arc that we had to sort of represent and look at the beginning versus the end. We talked about the brothers being related somehow, and how can their music be similar but different, right? They're totally different people. And so that was like the beginning part of the conversation. And then you start to think about, well, what does an acoustic guitar feel like, and what would that mean on this song versus an electric guitar or a banjo or a piano or a tuba, whatever it is, Eventually at some point we start to think, okay, this is the Aweigh Brothers, and we have to stay in that world, and so we want to use the same ingredients. But once you've done all of that kind of structural work about the story, it's a lot easier to forget about some of the things that may have been hallmarks of their versions of the songs. So in the very early days of the first couple readings of this, it was not as elaborate as it ended up, right? We were just trying to keep it really simple and tell the story, and we might do an entire song just on the piano and nothing else, just to say, okay, this is that sound, and then another song on a banjo with nothing else, just to kind of establish really big sort of building blocks. And then when we sort of go to the orchestration, that gets even more specific of, well, how do we make this feel as epic as it's going to look? I remember looking at the design elements before we started orchestrating it and thinking, okay, there's so many amazing things that we can do here, and what does the big boat, we call it the first act, the big boat, the second act, the little boat. How does the big boat sound different from the little boat? And, the best sort of example of that is in all of the big boat stuff, you hear acoustic guitar, banjo, piano, there's fiddle, there's acoustic bass and drum set. That's kind of like the ingredients of the first part. In the shipwreck, it transitions. We hear an electric guitar for the first time, but it's so buried, it's just there for like danger, and it's like sriracha in the mix, you know what I mean? Like, just like some hot sauce. And then the first thing that you hear after the shipwreck is an electric guitar. And it's like a sort of Jeff Buckley, hallelujah, clean electric guitar sound. And that compared to everything else is like, you're in a different universe at that point. I mean, if this is 1888, this is not even an instrument that exists at this point. And that was a very clear choice to kind of go with that. But then the song quickly sort of brings us back into the world, but you can't go back from there. It's there. And we were also very intentional about how we used the strings. They have a cellist in their band, they play with a fiddle player in their band, and there's lots of folky, sort of bluegrassy, country sometimes, sounds that you can use with that, but we also wanted it to feel cinematic and feel epic and feel really emotional and be able to kind of go to places that just feel more personal, I guess, to the story. And that's where it kind of veers a little bit away from what Scott and Seth have on their albums, but ultimately we wanted to keep the DNA that they created there, which, to answer your last question, is how I feel about all of it happening. I think, great music is great music, and storytelling is storytelling. It has to do that. If it doesn't do that, it won't be good theater. But I think that you can make good theater with a song that has lyrics that actually tell a story. And from there, I think it can be anything. I think it's really exciting. I think some of them are successful and some of them are not in that, but people love the music, and that's why it usually gets there. The reason it's at, I'll probably be like, oh, I love Alanis Morissette, I'm gonna go see that. And so I just think that anything that brings people to the theater is awesome for me, but I also really appreciate when it is story focused.
Yeah, well done, well said, very illuminating, I love that. Stark, talk with us a little bit about the reunion of it all with Michael Mayer and John Gallagher Jr. Man, that performance by John Gallagher Jr., I mean, yes, that was really something to see, and I know that you guys put so much of your heart and sweat and blood and tears and every other
all of those things
for a long 6-year path, 2 out-of-town productions, Broadway. What went through your mind when you found out that it was going to be this little mini American Idiot reunion of sorts?
Well, my first inkling of the show was reading about it on Playbill.com. And I heard that it was the Aweigh Brothers musical and Johnny was attached and Michael was directing. And at that point I was doing something else and I was like, oh, well that's perfect, that makes total sense because Johnny introduced Michael Mayer to the Aweigh Brothers. And then a year later, I get a phone call from Michael saying, hey, I'm doing this reading, I'm doing a workshop of this, or a lab. I know it's weird, there's different names, it's slightly different. A lab is like a 2-week thing, you get a little more time, you put movement into it. I was invited to a lab, and of course I said yes, because I thought, oh great, I get to be in a room with my friends. And I also knew John Logan because I was cast in a pilot for a HBO series that did not go to air, that was called The Miraculous Year, that John wrote. And listen to this, it was Frank Langella, Norbert Leo Butz, Patty Lupone played my mom, naturally. It was insane. Eddie Redmayne was the lead character, and it was about the building of a Broadway show. It sounds a lot like another show that happened a year later. It didn't go to series, but I got to work with John Logan on that, and it was so it was a reunion in that sense as well. at some point during these readings, if you're doing your job, if you're the right fit, you will sort of feel it. It's like a 2-week audition, really. You get to do this over and over again and work on it and help make it with these makers. And then if it works out, you become attached. And that's what happened, is that John asked me if I would like to just remain attached to this project. So it was, sometimes you do shows and you do jobs and you don't know anybody on them. And sometimes you do shows, and this one more than any other I've ever done, where you know almost everyone, including Brian Usifer, who did King Blues together. This was my introduction to Rachel. We didn't know each other, but now we do. And it just shows you how small the business really is the longer you do it.
So I really would love if we could dig a little into what it was like because for me, this was a brave and bold and ambitious piece to bring to a commercial theater setting, and I applaud it, and I'm so heartened by how many people, you know, that we met here today that were able to see it. That's a very specific and bold choice, and it is, as I've listened to you today and learned so much, I think, Rachel, it was you that said something a little bit ago about the joyful into the mournful and sorrow, and yet somehow, by the end of the show, we don't leave on a down note. It still maintained a sense of reality maybe, but I don't know if I would go so far as to say hopeful, but it didn't leave you in the depths, but it certainly took you there. And Stark, especially for you, telling so many different stories in theater throughout your career, just in theater alone, let alone anything else. What would you say in conversation, any one of you, but certainly because you had to actually speak these words, Stark, what was it? What was your experience in leaning into this kind of story and this kind of material that, let's just put it this way, you know, I call it non-jazz hands theater. You know, it's like, you know, there's going to be theater that's like, you know, and then there's going to be, I mean, your last Broadway show was like pure joy glitter bomb. You know, so the range of doing something like that, any thoughts on the bravery that I think that takes?
I feel very lucky that I've been a part of shows that mean something to people beyond, oh, it was fun. This one challenged an audience, right? And some people don't respond to that. Some people do not want to come to theater and be asked questions and forced to think and forced to put themselves into an uncomfortable place. But I do think that that's how we grow. And so the people who responded to it and who hung around at the stage door to talk about how much it means to them, that when that happens in a show, when you're lucky enough to have an audience who responds, that's the point for me. I'll take all kinds of jobs and I'll do the jazz hands. It's not really my ministry, as Billy Porter would say. But I'll do it because I know there's value in that too. But for me, the conversations that I got, the notes that I got from people that I read when I got home that said, you don't know me, I'm just a kid from Texas, but I saw this a couple weeks ago and I can't stop thinking about it. I've been estranged from my brother for a long time, and because I saw the show, I picked up the phone and I called him and I'm meeting him for coffee tomorrow. And that's just, man, like the fact that theater can do that and can reconnect people, or you know, in the case of Kinky Boots, I had a lot of conversations with kids who were like, I was lost, and this show helped me find who I am. And it's now my mom and I are closer than we've ever been. Like that's it. And for this show, I agree with you. This is like, it's a challenge to put this up in general, but especially in a theater that's 1,000 seats. And you got to fill those every night if you want to run. And this happens to be a show, spoiler alert, where someone commits violent suicide by surprise every night. It's not going to do it for everybody. People are not going to like that. Some people are going to go, oh my God, that was crazy, I didn't see that coming. I got to go see it again. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do it, and for the people who got to see it, and now for the people who get to listen to it on the cast album, which is so good, Brian. I'm so glad that it exists. I'm so glad we recorded it when we did. It was the day before we found out we were closing.
Thank God, heaven! Oh.
Because the energy was really great that day. And it was the easiest cast album I've ever done, and I think you probably would agree with that.
Agreed, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I would speak to this whole question as well, right? There's power in looking at the things you're afraid to look at. And the show is a metaphor for so many things through a very specific. I understand that darkness isn't for everybody. I understand the potential of watching that show can spark a lot of things for people, but there is hope in it. The questions it asks, the provocations of it, in greater political, in smaller personal. I found it to be incredibly powerful. And of course, when we were working on the show, we were always so happy to rehearse the first act, and we never wanted to rehearse the first act. You guys did that. You guys did it perfectly. We don't have to watch that. And then it was there. It's like, all right, settle in, and we would watch it. It was devastating and powerful every time. And so that experience, to give that to an audience, you can feel them. You can feel them with those guys in that boat, and people making the choices they make. And there's no right answer. It's an incredibly potent story, and I feel very lucky to have had an opportunity to be a part of it and to be in it.
I remember as a teenager really thinking, I don't care if somebody doesn't like what I do, I just want them to feel something. And I feel lucky to have gotten to work on shows that make people feel something. I remember my first Broadway show was The Book of Mormon. I remember going home from rehearsal with my abs hurting from laughing the whole time. And that's like some version of feeling something, right? But also like joy and like ridiculous and everything that show is. But this show really makes you feel and like hooks you into something that's so human and the tragedy in it is so real. Like people go through things. You know what I mean? I felt very connected to this show, and I also felt very intent on rising to the occasion. I will also call out Chris Miller and Will Van Dyke and Matt Deichman and the whole band. We talked before we started, I think in Arena, we were like, this show, the bar is so high on every level, we have to meet that, we have to rise to that occasion and tell this story in the most detailed and incredible and emotional, impactful way that we possibly can. And so that's where we set our focus, and that's where we left it.
Yeah, fabulous. And I want to just encourage people, I don't think that it happens as often in person, and this room feels very warm, and I want to thank you for, being such active listeners with us today, but it just comes to mind, and maybe this is more for the online community, any show that makes it all the way to the Broadway is an absolute success. Don't take what it takes for these artisans, and so many others that they represent to have put everything they have into making something the absolute best that it can be. If it only ran one performance, it would have been a success. So let's dispose of this notion that anything that, doesn't run chorus line number of performances is something other. It is such an achievement. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that art that gets made and can be delivered to the stage, that though it is, heart-wrenching, and I know you wrote about the roller coaster ride, but it is so phenomenal to step back and realize that that is a thing that got made, that so many people got to see that wouldn't have experienced it and been moved and created this sort of like domino effect of feelings and emotions, and that's why I believe the world is a better place for the art that gets made, especially on our stages. So I just had to preach for a minute. I just had to preach. Well, I want to leave some space for anyone that might have a question, if there's something on your mind that you'd like to ask, I think we have some audience mics. Oh, great, right, they're just here. They're here. If you have a question, step right up. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Larry Kaufman. My wife and I were investors in the show.
Oh, thank you.
And it was a great, the cast party was one of my favorite cast parties of all the shows we've been to. That venue was phenomenal. My question though for you was, when you announced the closing of the show, next thing you know, you had sold out audience. What did that feel like, being able to extend the show for 2 weeks, having the response to that announcement?
It was a wonderful feeling to feel the blow of the show coming to a close, and also just the sort of swiftness from when we learned to when it was going to close. It was only a week and a half, and it was seemed a very short amount of time, not long enough to like really come to terms with it. And like you said, the next day we were sold out, and that continued for the rest of the week. So it just became clear that there was an audience who really wanted to see the show. I think there's a misconception sometimes when, if you read the reviews, or certain reviews, if certain reviews are good, and in our case, we were a New York Times critics pick, and there was a time when that review could make or break a show. I think those times have passed. There's a lot more voices out there, and so it's better. This is better than the way it used to be, I think. But the problem is people still think, oh, we got a critics pick, it's going to run.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen. And so the producers got together. The decision was made to raise the money to do 2 more weeks. The money was raised, and the show. I was lucky enough to be the one to announce that the show was going to extend, and that's one of the most memorable moments of my career, is being able to say that to the audience that was in the room that day and share that news. It felt great because the last 3 weeks of that run, it was full. And not only was it full, but the people who came were the people who, in our industry, are the people we look up to, the peers that we admire, and the people we wanted to be able to see the show. It gave those people a chance to see it. And when you have those people in the audience, and when they run backstage to tell you how great they think it is, and what a beautiful piece of art you've made, it feels really good. So it changed the story in a really positive way for us.
Even Jesse liked it.
But it allowed many more of the people who wanted to see it to get there. Not everybody, but a lot more people, and it did. Our love is all over that stage. It was a huge family. That show was very close. We were all so proud of it, and it was a real blow to everybody. It's built. From my corner of things, the people who built that show built it to last, and the engineering involved. I know I already said that, but the engineering involved, and to think, oh God, right? You could take that show down in 4 days, and it's just sort of shocking to your system when you're in something for also one of the young ones only for 6 years. But it's truly shocking, and that turnaround changed the narrative of the story from the show that was going to close quickly to the show that the fans kept open.
Yeah.
And that was incredible.
Yeah, you did that, guys. We really appreciate it. That's incredible. It allowed me a chance to go back a second time because it had stayed with me, and I kept thinking about it, as I know many audience members had that experience. So it allowed some of us to even be lucky enough to see it again before it was too late. And Stark, I wanted to get to something quickly that we were talking about before we came on stage today, which was that we got things out of it on repeated viewings. You got things out of it in repeated performances. You were still finding stuff.
Always. That's the thing about theater, is that it is, in the way that I like to do it, is you never want to settle. You never want to settle into a performance. I always want to keep finding things, because when it's good, there's always stuff to find. And when you have good partners on stage with you, there's always something new to discover. And I've learned that by being a part of shows that run a long time, is that it never is frozen. And I mean, there were things that happened on Broadway that I didn't discover until then. We did it for 10 weeks in Berkeley and for 10 weeks in DC, and it was close to the end of Broadway where I'm hearing things out of my mouth that means something that I never thought of before. And for example, there's a moment in the show when I talk about the thing that I want. I want to stick my hands into the earth and squeeze it. But I never got to do that. My character dies. I'm the one who does. Everybody else gets to do that. I'm the one who doesn't. And I heard that, and it changed the way I did it the next day. There were things that, like, I don't know, I mean, everybody has their own experience with the election that happened, but that is something that happened during this run. And it was a really heavy day for a lot of people the next day. And no matter which way it went, it would have been. And the beginning of the song, A Gift from Melody Ann, is I want to get back. I want to get back all the hope. I want to get back, this and then. And I didn't see that coming that day. But my real life feelings that day bled into the performance, and I had a hard time singing the song that day because all of a sudden things merged. And that's what you get from live theater, is you get something fresh every night, and it changes with the alchemy of the audience, and it changes with the alchemy of the people on stage and whatever they're carrying with them that day. And that's the reason I love doing it.
Well said. Do we have anyone with a question? Hi, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Sivan.
Hi, Sivan.
Hi.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but I'm curious because the show on one hand is based on a very true story with a lot of details known, and the lyrics of the Aweigh Brothers are very specific, but then the characters don't even have names written in the script. And I was wondering, for all three of you, if you could talk a little bit about that experience of personal versus universal and where that kind of met you during working on this show.
Fabulous question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The first thing that sort of pops into my mind is, I remember at the very first reading, talking to John Logan about that, and hearing him talk. But I have recorded his voice memo somewhere that these characters are archetypes, and they represent something much bigger than themselves and the literal sort of character on stage. And I think I can only speak for the music, and I talked about it a little bit before, is that we were also going for that. We were trying to sort of make these characters have different sounds, but also just reach big ideas and not sort of, you know what I'm saying? I think that's, at least from the music, how I approached it, was that we're trying to be as universal as possible with the sentiment of the music so that as many people can relate to it.
Yeah, in some sense it's fable. And it's that same thing where it can apply in so many different ways. And so those characters not having names, nobody has a name, lets them go to a different place, I think. But it's very personal. It's incredible personal. And any show like this, when you start it and you get a chance to do it again and then again and then it comes here, the show grows. I mean, across the family, the show grows. The characters grow deeper, the performances grow deeper, the writing changes, the scoring changes. And it all starts to evoke more powerful depth, more opportunity for response. But I think that choice of John's really starts the opportunity for it to be, even within this very specific framework, a really universal story.
It's a really smart choice. It also lines up with the way the Aweigh Brothers write their music, which is that they are not writing about universal things. They are writing about specific things and people in their life, that those songs mean something to them, they come right out of their lived experience, and because they're so specific, they become universal to everybody else. And that's what we are trying to do in the show. My experience as Stark Sands moving through the world informs what I'm doing and the choices that I make. And they've changed over my lifetime. There's a song in Murder in the City, I talk about my dad. Well, my dad died when I was 23, and so when I sing about my dad on stage, and the father that that he shed a tear to tell me I love you both in so many different ways, man, that hits me in a different place, because my dad's not around to say that anymore. So all those things are useful, and that comes across to you as an audience member. You don't know what it is, but you know it's real.
Yes, so good, so good. I'm so glad you asked that question because I too was intrigued at the character names. And I also had put it on my reading list, the original book, because I was so captivated by the whole concept. And but is it really true that the three survived? And for quite some time, some of them. I mean, that is just wild to me. I never would have, going into it, because I love to go in as cold as possible. That's the way I enjoy a show the most, is the more I can just like give myself over to the story. And I couldn't believe, I had no idea it was gonna turn out that way. And that's so cool too. But that's really true, that the three survived.
Yeah, in the real story, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's...
They came home and everything was fine. Everybody was like, "You made it!" And then they told the truth. They were like, "Yeah, we had to eat the cabin boy."
Oh.
But he was dying anyway. And so, but because
then he
that
did it.
happened for centuries and generations, that's just what happened at sea. It's
Right.
like, well, okay guys, looks like we're not gonna make it, so let's draw straws, or draw lots, is what they say.
Right.
That's why the book is called Custom of the Sea.
Because it was a custom, it was a normal thing.
Yeah.
But at the time, in England, they were very puritanical, I know it's the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And there was one barrister who was like, now's my chance to pounce on this and stop this from happening forever. And that's what happened, is that they all went to jail for this. They were convicted, and the public outcry was so great that they were released from jail. Because but the case stood and stands today, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
They went to jail.
Goes to jail.
Oh my...
The book is wild.
I gotta get this book. I gotta get this book.
You know something funny that I noticed, because a lot of you would bring the book to the stage door to be signed? They've re-released the book with Swept Away in the corner of the book, our logo and everything. Yeah. Inspired the stage musical Swept Away.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
You know, hey, whatever